Welcome back. I hope everybody's had a good week, and thank you for joining me. And we have another important oil and another historic event at Therapeutics to catch up with. So first, some gratitude to everybody, of course. Thank you for joining these events and for all the nice comments that everybody's putting in throughout the week. I'm glad that you are finding these discussions valuable and enjoyable. They are certainly very fulfilling for me because this is one of my favorite subjects, of course, and I think it's extremely meaningful to talk about plant medicine. So it's something that I appreciate very much, that people share this interest. I'd also like to say thank you to all of you who have wholesale accounts with Floracopeia, and especially for those who joined us yesterday for our Q&A. A nice group was there, and unfortunately I missed it. I was only able to be there for the very beginning, and then the power went off and it didn't come on for several hours. But I want to say thank you to Jacob and Shauna at customer service for making it such a great event. All right, so we're going to talk about a new oil that just came in, which is the Himalayan Juniper, and this oil is produced by the same gentleman in Bhutan who gave us the spectacular Bhutanese Jatamansi a couple of weeks ago. So I was expecting to have a sample of this oil by now. We just got it a few days ago, actually. We just launched it on Wednesday. It came in Monday. It's been moving very quickly. And unfortunately, the delivery of the mail for some reason is taking a long time. And I haven't received a sample. So I wanted to give you my olfactory impressions right there. I wanted to actually open the bottle for the very first time and sample it while we were talking, but I'm not able to do that. So instead, this is what I'm going to propose. I'm going to suggest to all of you who have been purchasing this oil, and thank you for doing that, to check it out as a perfumer would. In other words, spend some time with it and try to make note of all of the different aromatic notes that you are perceiving. Now this is done best, of course, if you have a perfume strip, because you can put the oil on the perfume strip and then you can smell the oil, and the very first impression that you get is going to be the top notes. And then within a few minutes it's going to evaporate off slightly, and then you're going to start getting the middle notes, as they are called. And then after the dry out phase has proceeded for a while, then you will get the base notes. Okay, now this is a nice system that is used in aromatherapy and especially in perfumery to describe different layers of fragrance notes that are perceivable, top, middle, and base. And so it's a musical system, actually. And the term, again, is the dry out phase. And you can do this to some degree if you just smell it from the bottle, but you're not going to get the dry out phase. And you can also do it just a couple drops on the palm, or you can do it in the diffuser. But it's more effective, actually, if you have a perfume strip. Now, any kind of blotter paper that doesn't have a scent on it is also okay. But the perfume strip is the tool of the trade of perfumers and aromatherapists. And so if you would like a contact, it's actually orlandiusa.com, and that's ORLANDI-USA, orlandi-usa.com. Okay, so this is the primary source where those of us who work with essential oils, fragrance, and perfumes get these strips. So you've seen me do this many times. You just put a couple drops on the perfume strip, and the first impression will be what they call the top notes. And then within a few minutes, the top notes will evaporate out. And then after some time, what will remain are the base notes. Now, for an oil like the Jatamansi, what will be really distinct is not just the top notes at the beginning, because the Jatamansi is a very thick, heavy oil distilled from roots, and so there's a lot of earth element in it. You can smell the dirt, and it's a heavy, viscous type of oil, and the characteristic of a base note is the tenacity. The dry out phase lasts a very long time. As a matter of fact, some base notes will actually last for years. Patchouli, for example, is one of the most tenacious base notes that there is, and so you might have something that you spilled patchouli on like 30 years ago, and you can still smell it. So the juniper is more of a top note overall, and it does have middle and base notes, and as you smell this over time, what will become very obvious is that the top notes are the notes that are very fresh and light, and as the dry out phase continues, it starts to smell more and more like the resin, actually, the resin and the earth. So I'm going to suggest, as a little exercise, that all of you can just tell me next week what this Himalayan juniper smells like to you. So here's a little homework assignment, if you would like, for those of you who are getting it. Some of you may actually have it already. You might have received it before I did. So make some notes, and I know that lots of you are putting in comments and gratitude in our feed, and I'd be very interested to hear what your perception of it is throughout the week. And then what I would like to do is go back and review everybody's comments and add my own comments and give you a full olfactory description of what the Himalayan juniper smells like. Now, this is, again, a interesting story in terms of an eco project. So what we call an eco project is basically people that we are supporting who are doing ecological projects, all right? And in this case, they are the sources of our essential oils. And in some cases, other things like our frankincense resins and things like that. And we have very strict criteria, of course, for what constitutes something that's ecological. In other words, we don't want to participate in plundering of resources. We want to support people who are taking care of things. So in this case, we have what we would call a eco project in Bhutan, and this is, as I told you the story the week before when we first launched it, it's a gentleman who created a distillery specifically to do this, and so far he's doing everything for us, and he has many wonderful things lined up for us in the coming months as well. So it is, it meets the Fluorocopia criteria because everything is highly regulated now, and it didn't used to be that way, actually. You'll remember that when I told you the story about the Jatamansi up until fairly recently in Bhutan was being plundered, and now the king has stepped in and said no more plundering, and so it's now being highly regulated, and that's why we support it. Okay, we don't want to just boycott things because they are on an endangered list. We want to support the people who are regenerating them. That's where it gets complicated, because with some things like sandalwood, some people will say, well, this sandalwood species is endangered, but you have to look at it in a very educated way, because that species might be endangered just in one country, but abundant in another country. And if we start to just say, okay, I'm going to avoid all of that particular product, and what it does is it can become unsupportive for the people who are trying to take care of it. So it requires a fairly high level of knowledge about the species in each region. And this is, of course, what we try to help people become aware of, because one of the roles of Fluorocopia is not just to support the people, but to educate everybody about what's going on and why it's important that we are selective about this. So this is much more of an issue with the Jatamansi from Bhutan, but we can definitely say that all of that issue is well covered now. We have guarantees, we know what's going on, And this also applies to the juniper. Now, here's the main thing that, from the ecological standpoint, the environmental standpoint, this is what sets the juniper apart from the jadamanzi, and that is that the plant regenerates very easily. So when you see a plant that is threatened or endangered, you almost always see a configuration of different factors. One is there's a very high demand, but on the other hand, the plant doesn't regenerate quickly. So there's a very high demand for eucalyptus, but eucalyptus is not endangered. Eucalyptus is actually invasive. And the oil doesn't come from the roots or the heartwood. The oil comes from the leaves, you see. And so that's why eucalyptus oil there's no major shortages, and eucalyptus is not endangered. But on the other hand, jadamanzi comes from the root. And if you take the root, then you take the whole plant, you see. And that's where it gets more complicated. And that's why harvesting has to be regulated. We have to give the plants enough time to regenerate, okay? So this is why sandalwood is expensive and problematic, because the oil comes from the heartwood of the tree. And in order to get the oil, you have to destroy the tree. You can't just trim the leaves. You have to destroy the tree. And what makes it even more complicated is that in order to get the oil, it has to come from an old tree. Okay. Now there are some technologies that are coming with some of these tree oils like this that accelerate the process, but there's nothing like a 100-year-old sandalwood tree, you see. So ideally, we should only be getting oil from the plantations where they don't actually cut the trees down. They just distill the old trees that have fallen down naturally, and that's a very good practice. And what we are supporting, more than that actually, are the plantations, okay, that are coming up. So with this Himalayan juniper, I'll give you the background story on this. This is not an endangered species. This juniper is growing abundantly in Bhutan. And the people there are harvesting it themselves for their own personal use in the villages, because it is used in daily life for a number of things. But the large-scale harvesting for commercial purposes is regulated, all right? And therefore, we also can say very clearly that this is a crop that is being protected, okay? But it's also something that is not that much of a problem. So even though it's being protected from over-harvesting, it's a juniper, and it's the leaves. They're not cutting the trees down. That's the main difference between what makes something sustainable or threatened, all right? Whether you kill the plant or not, and in this case, no, they're trimming the leaves. So we have some videos that have gone up, and you can check those out. Of the harvesting, hand harvested, and then the leaves are cleaned to take out the woody material, and that's what gives a really high quality oil. The less wood material that is in an oil like eucalyptus, spruce, pine, fir, or juniper, the higher the quality the oil is. And the reason for that is because the stems or branches, if they are included in it, actually add more sort of terpene or turpentine kinds of compounds. And those are not necessarily bad, but they're not necessarily the highest quality oil either. So in the case of really high quality conifer oils, the needles only go into the still, and that can be very labor intensive, and you can see that being done on our videos. You can see that these people are actually cleaning the branches more, and what's being distilled, you can see it sitting in the still, and it's only the leaves, okay? A little bit of woody material is going to get in there, of course, but it's not like commercial distillation. Now, commercial distillation of things like juniper, they're actually an industrial byproduct of clearing the land. You see, so juniper in parts of the United States, for example, it's considered a real pest. And so they go in and they clear it, and they just clear it with chainsaws, and they just make these gigantic slash piles, and then they drag that over to the distiller, and they distill it, and a lot of wood gets in there. So this is an example of a high quality, handmade. It's literally handmade. Okay, it's not made by chainsaws and cranes and lifts and tractors and things like that. It's made by hand. Okay, they're actually cutting the branches by hand in small batches, and then they're separating the leaves by hand. It's very laborious, but what it does is it gives us a superior oil every time. So that's another aspect of the story of this. Now, the therapeutics, that's really what everybody would like to know about in terms of, well, what do I do with this oil? So now you know the backstory of the sustainability in the harvesting process and what makes it a good oil in terms of its cleaning process. And you also have this little homework assignment now to smell it throughout the week and make note of your comments, and then I will fill that out some more next week. But now we'd like to talk about, well, what does this actually do? And the starting point for talking about the use of essential oils is always, well, what was the plant used for in culture? And historically, what is the role of the plant? So as I've mentioned before, there's a lot of misconceptions about the length of time that essential oils have been around, and a lot of essential oils are very recent, okay, to the world, and maybe they were distilled for a few centuries, but not on any scale. Okay, it's not like you could, 200 years ago, it's not like you could find essential oils easily. Maybe in a few places you could find some sources, but the internet has changed everything, and now we can get anything from anywhere with a click of our mouse. But that's not always how it was. And so the distillation of essential oils is relatively new, but the use of aromatic plants is very old. I think that actually the use of aromatic plants is probably one of the oldest forms of plant medicine, other than our food plants, okay, that our ancient ancestors were attracted to because of the fragrance and recognized that the fragrance actually had therapeutic value. So with the juniper then, what is the story historically? What is the historic story? It is a tree that has been used primarily as an incense ingredient, and that puts it in the category of a sacred scent. Right now, when I use the term sacred scents, I generally refer to two primary species from three continents. All right, and so we have agarwood and sandalwood, the two primary sacred scents from Asia. And we have copal and palo santo, the two most important sacred scents from the Americas. And we have frankincense and myrrh from the Middle East. And so that's a very simple summation, because really if you look at each region of the world, you find that there are many things that are considered sacred. Now, that's an interesting question, like, what plant is not sacred, actually? Well, all plants are sacred. All botanical medicines are sacred. All food is sacred. All the elements are sacred. But when I use that term sacred scent, then what I'm referring to is its use historically for ceremonial and ritualistic purposes. And this is what juniper in the Himalayas has been used for. It's been used that way in other cultures and other places, but in the Himalayas it's a primary incense ingredient. And that's because it grows there abundantly, and it has been integrated into culture for a long time. The use of juniper as an incense ingredient is quite simple. It is either the dried leaves, or in some cases even the fresh leaves, or simply put on charcoal. All right. So I have seen this many times. I have been around this use many times, and I therefore have many emotional memories with the Himalayan juniper in the original culture. So I have been in many ceremonies in monasteries in Kathmandu over the years, and other places as well. And that is one of the primary things that is used. And it's not used conservatively either. It's used by the handfuls. So I have been in ceremonies where, the Vajrayana rituals are full of a lot of music, big drums, big long blaring horns, and bells ringing, and 100 monks chanting, or a small group chanting together. And there are cycles of meditation, cycles of invocation, cycles of liturgy, and so forth. And generally, the placing of the offerings on the coal corresponds with this ringing of the bells, blowing of horns, and banging on drums, you see. And so there's a full sensory kind of experience. And I remember many times in these ceremonies where this full sensory experience is happening, and then a very large amount of the dried Himalayan juniper would then go on this gigantic burner, and the entire meditation hall would be filled with thick juniper smoke. So that's used for sacred purposes, and that means purification. Purification at the aromatic atmospheric level means two things. One is antimicrobial, and the other is psychic or mental. And they go together. And that's quite easy to understand, because when there is an accumulation of depression, anxiety, fear in an environment, it tends to be accompanied with the aromas of the person or the family or the people who have to live in that environment, who are feeling all of these things. And these things are totally linked together. So hygiene, mental states go together. And a very simple example is when people become depressed, they don't take care of cleaning the house so much. And so the depression and the actual smell of the home can be seen together. So atmospheric purification then means that a plant, the essential oils in an aromatic plant specifically, is actually destroying the pathogens. And you will remember from my little talk on frankincense that a study was done that actually showed that fumigating an environment with frankincense actually killed something like, 85% of the airborne pathogens in the air, you see. So it's proven scientifically that these rituals to purify the atmosphere actually work. Now, it's not just that atmospheric purification that's important, however. It's also the effect on the mind and sacred scents, all of them. All the ones that I mentioned, the agarwood and sandalwood and frankincense and myrrh, all of these have significant effects on our psyche. They have significant effects through the olfactory limbic system link to mood enhancing and anti-anxiety effects. So again, we can see the entire spectrum of human mental and emotional suffering between two ends. One is what we could say the yin, and the other is the yang. Okay, so what is the yin? The yin means that we become more withdrawn. It means that we become depressed, we contract. It's a state of low energy. And on the other hand, the more yang expression is anxiety and panic attack and so forth. So what we would like then, the middle ground, is to find the state of mind that is not affected by either. And that's ultimately what we can say that spiritual practice has always been about, is healing the mind, you see. It is well known that people turn to religion. More people go to church during times of economic stress than any other time. So we turn to spiritual practice frequently as a result of mental and emotional suffering. And all human suffering basically is on this spectrum. Now the sacred scents are very interesting because they have this dual function. which is that they are both relaxing and calming and simultaneously uplifting. And we can definitely say this about the juniper, whether you take the leaves and put them on a coal while you are doing your ritual invocation, or whether you put some in the diffuser. All right, so it's in the category of sacred scents, and that means that it has a simultaneous dual function of calming the nervous system and the stress and uplifting the mind. And we find that with the junipers and the historic use and all the other sacred scents. Now that's where we find the historical connection to where does this oil fit in? How can we understand this oil in terms of its ancient use? Because they weren't distilling juniper oil even 100 years ago. It's relatively new, and there's only this oil coming from Bhutan. It's not widely accessible at all. It's not a world's first, okay, but it's not widely available either. So what can we say then about some of the other functions? We can say, first of all right, spiritual use, ceremonial use, historical use, and we can duplicate that. We can duplicate that with the oil in our diffusers, if nothing else. Well, the next thing that we can say is that it is a respiratory oil. All the conifers, and it is a conifer, spruce, pine, fir, and junipers, all have an affinity for the respiratory system. As a matter of fact, that's one of the main things they treat. So this links again to the atmospheric purification. And it links also to affecting the terrain of the mucous membrane in several positive ways that we could say are balancing. Okay, one is that it's decongestant. So you can use the juniper, a couple drops on a pot of hot water, cover your head with a towel, and breathe it. It'll clear the sinuses. It is also expectorant. It'll bring up congestion. It'll help to clear a cough with congestion. So in that sense, we say that it balances the kapha in Ayurvedic terms. It clears the kapha. And anything that clears the kapha, the phlegm, the heavy water and earth element in the respiratory system, automatically means that it is oxygenating by nature. So the conifer oils are all very rich in air element, and anything that's rich in air element also means that it's rich in prana, because air is the vehicle of prana, the life force of the atmosphere that the plants create. So we can think of juniper then as one of the important respiratory oils, and we can therefore combine it. And we can put the juniper in any combination that we want, depending on our personal preference. There's no medical rules with this. You can use it half and half with eucalyptus. You can use equal parts juniper, eucalyptus, and a spruce oil or a fir oil like this. So it's very, very flexible. There's a lot of shared compounds in those oils, and it's all based on your personal preference. Now, all of those oils, that category of the respiratory oils, can be used in the diffuser. It can be used in a steam inhalation treatment. It can be used safely on the skin. These are all low dermotoxic oils. We don't have to worry too much about burning ourselves. Don't overdo it. But we can put a drop directly on the palms, breathe it. We can put a couple drops on the palms if we're in the shower, rub it on the chest. We can dilute it in a carrier oil or a salve, put it on the chest. We can put it on a hot towel, put it on the chest. Those are a few of the basic ways that we can use it as a respiratory oil for colds, flus, cough, congestion, allergies, things like this. It can work very well. So this entire category of oils then blends with other categories of oils also. And all of these respiratory oils blend very nicely with flowers. And all of these respiratory oils also blend very nicely with other sacred scents, especially frankincense is a very useful oil as a respiratory oil. So these are just a few broad guidelines of how we can use it for respiratory purposes, and that includes the antimicrobial powers. Atmospheric purification is antimicrobial at one basic level. Respiratory is antimicrobial at another level. So again, just to finish my little train of thought about the Ayurvedic doshas, decongesting means that it removes the kapha and it opens the channels of prana for more air element. But it's also anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial, which means that it reduces pitta. Okay, and essential oils for the respiratory system are not hydrating in themselves for dryness of the lungs, but if they are used in a ionizing diffuser where it's putting out a little bit of water vapor, or it's used in steam, that has a hydrating effect. And so that's much more important in the dry western states to consider. We use more water with the essential oils to hydrate since the atmosphere is already so dry. So that's a quick overview of the respiratory functions. And now finally, the last major therapeutic category for this new Himalayan juniper oil and juniper oils in general is the musculoskeletal system. It's actually somewhat surprising to find that the respiratory oils, eucalyptus, spruce, pine, fir, junipers, they are major oils for external topical applications for musculoskeletal pain and inflammation. They improve circulation. They reduce stiffness. Okay, so you can utilize this in a couple different ways. A really simple way is just take a cup of dead sea salt or Epsom salt and put 5 or 10 drops of the Himalayan juniper oil in it, mix it up well, and then disperse that in a bath. Okay, and then take a bath, and that's going to really relax the musculoskeletal system. It will be good for the respiratory system. It will be good for your mood as well. And it's always helpful for both the nervous system and our mood and the musculoskeletal system to alternate hot and cold. So take a nice, warm, relaxing bath, take a lukewarm rinse, and then bring it down to cold if you can stand it. And sometimes what you can do is that you can just stay in the bath, go back and forth. And if you can alternate like that and add that aromatic dimension to it, you can really make a lot of progress with musculoskeletal health in general. You can also put it into a carrier oil and use it as an application. And one of the real simple concepts to keep in mind here is that there are these medicated herbal oils that are easily available. I've mentioned one of the most common ones, the easiest one to use from the Ayurvedic sources, Maha Narayan Oil. Now you can use that as a base. It's got a lot of different herbs that are cooked in it that are for the musculoskeletal system. Okay, it's renowned as the supreme relaxing oil for the musculoskeletal system. And then you can just add essential oils to that depending on what purpose you would like. And you can add this Himalayan juniper to it. And I'm sure that there are many versions in the local medicine of the Himalayas that actually cook this in carrier oil for topical applications. So that's a quick overview, which of course is a lot of information, but I hope that that is helpful for you. And again, I would like to hear your comments about what you think the fragrance is. So let me just check and see if there's any questions that have come in, and so far it doesn't look like I see anything, and that's okay. You can post your questions later. And so with that, I would just like to say again, thank you for joining me, and let's have a little further discussion throughout the week on the feed about what you perceive in the fragrance. And next week I will actually have the bottle and the perfume strip ready to go. And so have a wonderful week. See you next time.